Doc here again. This is our continuation of the Toolbox tour, and today we've got the Pry Bars, scrapers, punches, and picks. So let's dive in. Most of these are snap-ons, and there's a reason for that. I've tried a few of the other scrapers and the other Pry Bars, and I really like the form factors of the snap-ons. And the scrapers, I think, are second to none. This particular one is, I would call it my go-to. If I've got to grab something, if I'm doing a lot of home repair stuff, I use these for tile work, flooring, finish work, working even with some appliances, because I can get in and use them as pry bars. I use them for cleaning things, scraping off material, whether it's rust or a tag or glue. This one here, this is probably, I use it as much as all of the rest of them combined. These are amazing if you haven't used them. These are the striking scrapers that Snap-on makes, and these guys are phenomenal. They're kind of like chisels. They're not sharp. I mean, they're not going to cut you easily, but I find I grab these whenever I've got some kind of a big job that requires sort of a combination scraper, putty knife, chisel, pry bar. I mean, it's just a beefy, beautiful chunk of steel, and they come in a lot of different flavors here. You can see the kind of the blade shape difference. This one's contoured on just the tip here. This has got a tip and a side. This is a smaller version. Here's their larger one. Here's their finest tip. This one's probably the most chisel-like. But boy, if you need something that beefy and you're not afraid to whack it with a hammer, I highly recommend these. They come in you can buy them individually, obviously, or they come in two different sets, kind of larger ones and smaller ones. And I've got all of them. And honestly, I don't see enough of these out there. They're just incredible, and I think it might be the price. And a couple of them, like these two, I think I've put on the grinder and put a pretty fine edge on them, and that's because I damaged them over time. And I think I started out grinding it back to kind of what the factory sharpness was, and then went ahead and took it a little bit further. But anyway, definitely something to check out. Snap-on's got a couple of new little pry bars, these kind of hockey stick types. They're very smooth, round, so you're not worried about hooking them or catching them or scraping or scratching. But these are really great for like prying up things. I use them a lot in the cars, popping little covers off of things, whether it's lights or other parts of the electronics where you need to get behind it and just add a little bit of a prying motion to it, where most people would grab a screwdriver. I grab these. So something worth checking out. This is a Snap-on's indexing pry bar. These are kind of pricey. However, they are super handy. I was using this one just the other day in an RV where I had to pry apart some covers on things, but I couldn't really get in it because of the small opening with anything larger. But I could index this to exactly where it would fit. It was more like out here, and then wedge it in and just pop off the parts that I needed. But I probably, if I didn't have this, I may have tried to fabricate some sort of a pry bar to hook in and pop it off, because I had to do a bunch of them. They were kind of light covers. Definitely came in handy there. The kind of lady slipper or lady's foot or roll pry bars, these come in handy for a lot of different things, and I've beat up on this one pretty bad. And still is great. They make a tiny one. If I don't find it right away, I'll get to it. But it's definitely you know, on the small side, but this actually does come in quite handy, and I find myself using this part of it a little bit more. It's kind of like when you wouldn't want to use a punch. You know, I've got different kinds of punches in here, the punch sets, and this particular pry bar, you know, if you're going to start out with a, you know, a small roll pin or a punch, I'm much less worried about damaging this pry bar than I am, you know, bending a nice snap-on punch. So this comes in handy there. You're not worried, you know, as you really have to wedge on something. Little tiny one. I mean, look at that guy. But super, super handy. Obviously all the way out to their great big old snap-on. This one's kind of a vintage snap-on. Again, I think I ground this down because I've damaged it before. And this is a little worn off back here, but just a beefy chunk of metal for a lot of different uses. I do have big pry bars. I mean, you see some of these, you know, like these guys here, and I do run them all the way out to them. I think the longest here, this is a 36-incher. I've got them all the way up to this size. They do make them bigger, but I find that these just are about the most handy things in the world. They come in, you know, you can start out with, I think this is their smallest, and they're a little bit sharp. That's why they come with a cap on them. But super, super strong for the, whatever the metal is that they're using on these guys, compared to a screwdriver. Screwdriver, you start to bend it and snap it off. It's different. This is designed for prying and striking. So I know there are some companies that sort of blur the lines between pry bars and screwdrivers, but definitely get something that's designed for prying. This is the new snap-on handle. This was kind of their conventional handle prior to it. So these are the same, roughly the same blade, but you can see that they've gone to a different handle, and now they've scaled everything up. And I've talked about that in other videos where, you know, you got the same size hand, but when you compare it, you know, the size, they take one design and then they just make it bigger or smaller. And I think it's on the pry bars not too bad, but I wouldn't mind, you know, something a little bit bigger than this. They do have that, I think, on their striking chisels set, but if you're using a pry bar, it's probably not for, you know, real fine work. I don't mind these old quad designs. It's not, you're not turning them like a screwdriver. And I found kind of one of the reasons I might complain, you know, when I went into the screwdrivers, is that when I'm using the same, essentially kind of the same handle here, with a screwdriver and a pry bar, you know, what's the benefit? I'm using them totally differently. And when I end up going to the pry bar and realizing, yeah, it might work or it not work, you know, it's designed for rotation. I'm not rotating this thing. That's where I think they really needed to update it. But this would be almost a worthless screwdriver handle. So they're figuring it out. That's good. On the other side, I've got a lot of scrapers. These are known as carbon scrapers, and I don't scrape a whole lot of carbon with it. You can also scrape gaskets off and other things. I end up using it for tile work, when I'm doing sealing with silicone, flattening aluminum. Sometimes I'll slide this along and tap on it, almost like a dolly or a spoon in auto body. But they're just so handy. Woodworking, sometimes I'll use this instead of a chisel, or even the real fine ones. That have, you know, a nice small tip, put a lot of force on that, and the metal's hard enough. So if I'm working with aluminum or softer metals, I can even kind of scrape into it or remove imperfections. And they often are sold in sets, and that's how you end up with them, whether or not you use them. But you can see kind of the wear patterns. So I use these quite a bit. But lately I've gone more to these. These are more recent, but definitely come in handy. Especially, like I said, I use them for tile. I use them with stonework. They work both as a pry bar and a scraper, so you can do some pretty fine stuff. Even drywall, they come in handy for kind of cleaning up edges, scraping off imperfections. You can get them sharp enough to cut the paper that's holding the gypsum together, but definitely a good thing to have around. As far as the picks go, they're kind of short and long picks. These are the long ones. The snap-on design is, or the classic, there are kind of four of these guys. There's a, you know, the long point, pointed ones, the hooks, the 90-degree, and then the, wherever it went, this guy here. Oddly, this is about the one I use the most. It's got this funny little bend in it, and I noticed that if you compare the two, even though, you know, they look about the same, this one's actually a lot sharper, a lot finer, and I end up picking up a couple of different sizes. You can see the sort of the layout of these guys. I am always grabbing these. If you don't have a good set of picks, you need them. I've had some Craftsman ones, and the Craftsman, I found the metal wasn't quite as strong, and they also, the handles, sometimes I'd be working on something and the handle would just start to spin. You can obviously get them warranted, but I've not had any trouble with the snap-ons, and I use them all the time. I find I don't use the long ones near that much. It's just a small handle with a really long blade is a fairly narrow use item. Mainly because when you get out a certain distance, you know, your dexterity is off a little bit when you're trying to get something. So obviously, if you need to get down into a small area, if I'm chasing a wire or opening something up, I need the length. I do, but otherwise, this is a lot more fine work, a lot more in control with something like that. And then with the chisels and punches, or with the punches. I have a lot of extras. I tend to, you know, these are almost like throwaways. Some of these are snap-ons, Proto, a couple of Craftsman, and they're handy to hang on to, especially if you need, you know, something kind of sacrificial. There's no Proto. But then I also have my good ones as far as my punches go, and I take care of these. I use them a lot in electronics and gunsmithing, or gun work, basically, you know, building different things and modifying firearms. So you definitely need a good set of punches, and then protect them. So these are kind of my throwaways for a lot of things, but I find that they come in handy, and I'm not as worried if there's a chance I might damage it. I will throw them back on the grinder and try to take them back to a usable edge, but I'd rather have a good set and keep it that way. That's the pretty much the extent of my pry bars, my scrapers, punches, chisels, etc. in this drawer. I have a few others that I'll get to later in the video that are kind of more domestic or normal, you know, in what you'd expect, you know, scrapers, etc. But these are the good ones that I go to all the time for all kinds of things. And just because it says carbon scraper and is for automotive doesn't mean that this wouldn't be great. If you got to reseal a bathtub, or you're working on a shower and you need to adjust the amount of silicone you squirted around the fixture, grab a hold of one of these. Tile work, fabulous. I do probably about one tile project a year, one big tile project, and instantly grab all of these. Got questions? Post them in the comments. Otherwise, Doc out.